Good evening, everybody. It is 6 o'clock. If we start tonight's cabinet, it's Tuesday, the 16th of December. Item 1 on the agenda are apologies for absence. We are.
Councillor Gabby Bunny's running just a little bit late, but we'll be here in a minute. Chair.
Okay. And I've just seen a message from Councillor Williamson. I presume that's to say she's either going to be late or not here. The traffic is absolutely horrendous tonight. It took me 45 minutes again to get here tonight. So if they are late, apologies for being late. Item 2 then, any declarations of interest? Councillor McGrath.
Chair, on the scrutiny review for the graveyards, I own 3 graveyards.
Okay.
Or 3 graves, sorry, grave
graves.
plots, not graveyards.
And of course, I have been informed by the monitoring officer that I have a predetermination, so I have to vacate the chair, and it will be done by that item will be chaired by Councillor Greg Marshall.
Chair, I've just had a message from Councillor McRae, who is going to give he's giving his apologies as well. He thought Liz would be here by now. Giving apologies.
Right. Well, I say probably this is it probably ought to be in traffic. Yeah, it's horrendous tonight. Never like that, Philip, when you were there at County.
No, things have deteriorated very much so.
Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of November 25 is set out on pages 13 to 20. Are we agreed that they are a true correct record? Agreed. All in favour? Item 4 then, scrutiny reviews. I've got Chair of Scrutiny as well tonight, Councillor Sean Danaheimer. Hi Sean, delighted that you're able to attend again. I'll go first to Mr Jeremy Ward to introduce the item on scrutiny.
Thank you, Chair. The Scrutiny Committee continues its work programme. Yesterday, as we'll come on to on a future item on the agenda, it completed its review of cemetery memorials and sends its recommendations to Cabinet, and also took an update on markets. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Sean Danahara.
Thank you, Chair. At this moment in time, I've got no more to add. We had the market review, which was a 6-monthly review.
Yeah. I've looked at your programme as well going forward. It seems reasonable. I still want to look at the democratic arrangements for the East Midlands Combined Authority, particularly in respect of district representation. So I'd like to look into that as well as a scrutiny review over the course of the next 6 months or so. Right, then move to item 5. For that, I will vacate the chair and invite Deputy Leader Councillor Greg Marshall, who will take this item.
Thank you, everybody. Councillor Danham, of course, mentioned that this review was at scrutiny last night, and that recommendation was made to bring it forward to Cabinet, this Cabinet meeting. But I would like the Chief Executive, Mr. Zulf Dar, to make a statement, please.
Good evening, members and members of the public. I just want to update people today on where we are with this report. It's come to my attention, unfortunately, an equalities impact assessment has not been carried out on the 70s Memorial new policy. And given that, the Cabinet won't be in a position to make a decision today. I'll be meeting with the Assistant Director of Environment tomorrow to make sure we can move that as expeditiously as possible for completion, and then the report will come back to Cabinet once that is complete. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dar. So, on just one thing I'd add is the commission and scoping of that EQIA will be done in conjunction with myself as well on that. So we can ensure that that is turned around as quickly as possible, and that we can ensure that this is brought back before Cabinet at the very, very earliest opportunity. But unfortunately, on that basis, we won't be able to discuss this item tonight, because councillors won't have the full information in front of them. So I'm moving that we do not discuss and just withdraw this item tonight. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you very much, and a show of hands on that, please. So that is withdrawn, and then we'll move on to item 6. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, Greg mentioned it. Were you stuck in traffic? Not at half an hour, is it normally? Was the A610? Really? What was the accident? Oh, really? Shopping traffic? Christmas traffic? Okay. And how have you been fitting well? You alright? Any more trips to Dubrovnik? Really? Really? But you're a global traveller. Yeah, I have. Yeah, my mum's not good. We've got a carer for house 4 times a day. Got to do something. Yeah.
Sorry for slightly late. Item 5 then, item 6, economic development and asset management. First is a substantial item tonight is the submission of the Greater Nottingham Strategic Plan for examination. It's set out on pages 67 to 360. I'm going to introduce this item myself. This is a result that we put together through the Joint Planning Advisory Body, JPAB, which I have chaired. Gedlin have withdrawn from the plan process, but still part of the working group in terms of design, but not part of the consultation on numbers. So they aren't part of this local plan. We've had to revise the plan details in depth over the past year or so. But tonight what we're doing is recommending to full council to approve the submission of Greater Nottingham Strategic Plan for examination. Work began on this in 2020, and it consisted of, as I said, Broxtowe, Gedlin, Nottingham City and Rushcliffe, until Gedlin withdrew because they need to find more housing sites. Been several rounds of consultation. I think we've done 3 rounds of consultation to this point, and the most recent taking place March this year. Nottingham City and Rushcliffe have already accepted the plan, and now Broxtowe is the final one before submission. And this, as I said, is done through the joint arrangements for the Joint Planning Advisory Body, which is chaired by myself. The last meeting was last week. So I just want to go through very quickly, if I can, in introduction before I pass over to Mark, some key figures for you. In respect to the strategic plan, it proposes an annual housing target of 497 homes per year, which equates to 8,950 new homes, and that takes us up to the period 2041. It's a high target, but it's significantly, and this is the point I want to make tonight, significantly lower than would be required if we had to start the whole process again and produce a new plan. We would be required to deliver 649 new homes. So it's absolutely essential to protect substantial parts of our green belt tonight that we're able to recommend to Cabinet for approval tomorrow. It's still a highly ambitious figure, one that I fear will not be met, and I've made my comments clear, I think, through several press interviews over the last 6 months. A 1.5 million new homes in 5 years nationally is just a pipe dream, cannot be achieved, and therefore what we need to do is to look at ways in which we can protect as much of the open space in Broxtowe as possible, whilst accepting that we need to plan for growth and expansion over the next 17 years or 16 years now. And I want to point out again from the outset, we are not meeting any unmet need from any other authority. That includes Nottingham City, Rushcliffe or any other authority. We are not meeting any unmet need that they can't make. And the only greenbelt change for housing that we're proposing is at Towton, where a change is proposed to facilitate the link road, which is the A52 link road through to Chetwynd Barracks, which we consider to be absolutely essential to prevent further gridlocking of Towton Lane in particular. That's the only allocation that we're proposing. And then we're also proposing to allocate major logistics development where we're set at former Benlick and coal disposal plant. And this is studies, from the studies have shown there is significant unmet need for logistics across the Greater Nottingham area. And we've identified that this location can deliver a significant number of jobs to the benefit of nearby communities and can also deliver a country park as part of the development. And I'll come on to that part when I move the recommendations. But just to say to people to understand the need for creation of jobs in that area and to ensure them jobs are accessible and available for local people, we have always insisted that any planning application must have pedestrian footpath, cycleways and other links connected to Eastwood and through to Cockmanay and Ilkeston. This site, of course, was and is now a site of Newthorpe sewage works. Part of the site was also the old Digby colliery and colliery disposal, the colliery washing plant originally, and site and disposal point. The plan, therefore, were also to ensure development is delivered sustainable, and with no update to the plan, we will be very, very vulnerable to speculative development, particularly in Greenbelt. And it also makes it more likely developers propose non-compliant compliant developments, i.e. things like affordable housing. Also, colleagues, the plan includes a number of key benefits to benefit Broxtowe, key policies. So the requirement for developments to comply with minimum space standards in residential development, measures to restrict the concentration of houses in multiple occupancy or HIMOs, rather than relying on supplementary planning guidance, and focus on the blue and green infrastructure and connecting key corridors, for example, to the north of Eastwood, and the potential creation of a country park. So I want to stop at that point and bring in Mark Thompson. As you know, Mark has been working now on this plan with Matt Gregory, particularly across the city, and I place on record my thanks for the great job that they've done in putting this strategy together. There are a number of recommendations set out on page 67, which I now move from the chair.
I'll second that.
But before I move on to Mark, I want to stress that particularly in reference to the green and blue infrastructure, along with the proposed Towton and Chetwynd development comes what I call a Towton Great Park, which extends for between 80 and 120 acres between the Towton and Chilwell and Stapleford, with pedestrian access and footpath access to all those communities. It also comes with a logistics issue around the Erewash Valley, the proposal for a 30-year long-term maintenance and restoration of the Erewash Valley. And for those of you who've never heard it before, it's only 50 years since the River Erewash was the most polluted river in England. And this will at last give us the opportunity for those people in the north especially to ensure that our environment is protected and brought up to an acceptable standard. And also there you'll see, Chair, colleagues, under recommendation 4, we're going to ask the planning examiner to consider proposed modifications, including the creation of a DH Lawrence Country Park north of Eastwood, and to make the any modifications necessary to the Greater Nottingham Strategic Plan under section 20(7)(c) of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. And the reason why this is so important is to protect the historical, particularly literary reference of the D.H. Lawrence Country of My Heart, will form a link using existing footpaths or railway lines, corridor lines between Colliers Wood and Brinsley Headstocks, and we hope therefore will encourage over the years the development and creation of that historic countryside to be retained for future generations. Recommendation now moved and seconded. I'll now move to Mark Thompson.
Through you, Chair. Could I just ask Councillors Williamson and Bunn if you have any interest, please?
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. And now move on to Mr. Mark Thompson, who will now carry out the presentation on behalf of JPAB and the Greater Nottingham Strategic Plan.
Thank you, Chair. So I think you've covered in terms of the key issues which need to be considered tonight in quite a bit of detail. But just to clarify in terms of some of the recommendations, because I know there's a number of recommendations which are going to, or made tonight to Cabinet to endorse, which will then go to full council tomorrow night. So the first one is in terms of the submission of the plan itself, and just to, it's slightly strange in terms of how the sequence of events happens in terms of submission of the plan. So we submit the version of the plan which we consulted on back in March 2025, and it's that exact form which we have to submit. But what we submit alongside that is the responses we received to that consultation, and this would either help to provide additional clarity to the plan, or is changes required in response to consultation. So, along with 1 and recommendation 4, that is why we submit those proposals to the inspectors as part of the submission. It is then for the planning inspectors to consider those, and they will probably also recommend other modifications as well as part of the examination. The examination itself will can take well over a year. The exam is in Ashfield. Is it working again? So the examples in Ashfield and Erewash show that they can be an examination for over 2 years. So it is this next step is significant, but there's still a lot of work to do once we are at examination. So in terms of the other recommendations which are before you, so the recommendation 2, this is to consider the effect of the plan following Gedling's withdrawal. This is part of the regulations that when an authority withdraws from a joint plan, the other remaining authorities have to consider what the impact of that is. We're only aware of one example of this case in the rest of the country, which was when Stockport withdrew from the Greater Manchester Plan, and that was subject to a legal challenge. So it's very important that we've shown that we've considered that and the impact it has. We think the impact is, in terms of the plan, can continue. It's been amended to withdraw the references to Gedling, but effectively all the key, the vision, the objectives and the policies still remain relevant, even with Gedling's withdrawal. And then in terms of the number 3, in terms of recommendation, that is just in terms of if there was any very minor sort of typo or corrections which were required, that is the delegation to correct those prior to submission. But we'd be hoping to submit very quickly if approval is given at council. So that probably hopefully shouldn't be required. And I've covered number 4, but then in terms of number 5, the local development scheme, that's something which we're required to keep up to date, and it's the norm in terms to update that at submission. So it's a timetable setting out when we submitted the plan, when we hope to adopt the plan, and to ensure that that is reflects the latest situation. I think in terms of the key figures which the chair's covered in terms of our housing requirement, it's probably just to re-emphasise in terms of if we do not proceed with this current plan, we would have to start again. We would have to proceed under the most up-to-date standard method, which is now what our housing target would be based on, and that is currently 649 homes per year. But it increases based on updated population data and affordability data, so it could well increase again. Also would have to proceed based on the new local plan system. There was some further detail published just before this meeting in terms of the new National Planning Policy Framework, but other details about the new local plan system aren't going to be available to the new year, so there'll be considerable delay in terms of when we could proceed, and also would have to re-instruct all of our evidence base as well at considerable expense to the authority, particularly if we were not doing it jointly with the neighbouring authorities, which has saved significant amounts of money in terms of the evidence base. And the most significant risk in terms of not proceeding is the policy vacuum which we have in that intervening period. We don't have an up-to-date local plan. The presumption in favour of sustainable development, which is in the National Planning Policy Framework, would apply, and that would mean it would be very difficult for us to be refusing speculative planning applications. And previously, we've always been able to try and push back on schemes in the green belt, but that would be increasingly difficult based on grey belt introduction and that concept, which now means that if you haven't got an up-to-date house plan and if you haven't got sufficient housing supply, then it's very difficult to refuse planning applications on large areas of the green belt. So we would be very vulnerable in terms of that too, without proceeding with a plan. So hopefully, they're the negatives. There's a lot of positive things in the plan too. I think, as the chair pointed out, in terms of the housing policy, in relation to nationally described space standards, to bring the policy basis for houses and multiple occupations, to reinforce some of the things which are in the SPD, but to give them proper policy backing is really positive. And the blue and green infrastructure policy, trying to connect it to the blue and green infrastructure strategy and ensure that like blue and green infrastructure is actually sort of essential for new development coming forward. The weaving of the country parks through the plan as well is really critical. So hopefully there's quite a lot of important things in there which is reflected within the plan, and also making sure we deliver the infrastructure which we need as part of new development. So the example of the Total Link Road, but all developments need to be ensure that they do have the infrastructure there. Having the plan in place just gives us more teeth in terms of to ensure the developers do deliver that as part of development. So I think that covers it, but happy to answer any further questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Before I go out for questions, is everybody clear on the principles and policies related to the local plan? What we've tried to do in this is to draw a very, very strong boundary. So we accept our responsibility that we need to increase the housing and the types and location of properties, but what we've tried to do is protect and enhance the environmental concerns that go along with great lots of development. So every development proposal that's contained within the local plan has to have an environmental assessment that gives an increase in particularly in BNG, but makes a significant contribution to our carbon net zero figures. And the biodiversity net gain is set at 10% is the absolute minimum that we are accepting, that we want to see more than that. So particularly on things like Toton includes a huge swathe of land that will be retained as open space, as country park, and referring to the Harworth site, to the Bentley disposal site, is also contained there within the management and maintenance, long-term and security of the Erewash Valley, which stretches right away from Ashfield through the floods right the way down to the River Trent, and takes in 4 different local authority areas. But the biggest part of that, particularly the most vulnerable part, is the wetlands, which is to the side of Horsworth, and of course back to Eastwood. So in dealing with the local plan, and we've had several discussions at length, I think, to say with Mark about the effectiveness and Ryan and his team, it is essentially to draw a very strong greenbelt boundary that enhances the environment and opportunities for local people, whilst accepting our responsibility to build houses particularly affordable for those people in greatest need. I'll stop there, and if there are any questions or comments, direct them to the chair, and myself and Mark Thompson will endeavour to answer them. Councillor Skinner.
Yeah, I'm looking at the housing on page 113, where the target for being carbon neutral is like 2050 still, but in the second paragraph it seems very ambitious that new buildings are expected to achieve net zero almost immediately. I wonder, how soon would we intend to be implementing that, or would we still be having our eye on 2050? And also over the page it's saying that developments of 50 dwellings should be able to generate their own energy. I don't know if does that just mean having solar panels, or is it actually like having a wind farm or something that's creating energy in the development?
Do you want to answer that, Marge, or we should?
You first, Chair, then I'll pick up anything else.
Okay, what we've done is to look at schemes that are large, particularly large scale plans, to ensure that any generation needed is to minimise huge swathes of pylons and shipping in electricity and other services to the site, by ensure that they are self-sustained. So the buildings themselves must be of a high standard, environmentally high standard. So not only are we talking about space standards, because that makes it, as we all know, houses are built too small, we can't access grant for them to buy them. And so we're at a significant disadvantage. What we've done though, however, is to insist upon things like it's not just about solar panels, it's about looking at other renewable sources, in particular ground source heating. So the whole range is being looked at carefully in the application on ways of minimising the amount of infrastructure needed to make the project work, but balance that against the needs to provide much more sustainable housing development to an acceptable standard, to an acceptable living standard, access to open space, access to recreation, access to employment, and to other services such as medical facilities, education services, as well as shops and other businesses. So all the plan is targeted specifically for growth areas that can meet that sustainability criteria. And that's why we've not looked to expand into the green belt, say like in Nuttall, Watnall, Greasley, north of Eastwood, Brinsley. All them sites now are being saved and protected by accepting responsibility. We have to generate the numbers, but the criteria has to be that they can meet all our objectives within that. We call it, it's a jokingly referred to as Millen's 6 principles. And those principles, as I've outlined to you, especially on space standards and living standards. Further questions or comments? Councillor Greg Marshall, then I'll come to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You spoke about the importance of housing and the environment at the moment. There is, of course, the importance that obviously the Toton site plays in all of this for Broxtowe, obviously for housing.
Absolutely.
And Chetwynd, obviously for the commitment that we've sought as part of any development there is the country park element of that around Bramcote Woods. But the third leg of that stool is, of course, the Toton strategic location for growth.
Yeah.
We should do it. I hope that you agree that we should be doing absolutely everything we can to work with EMCA to secure funding for, as a priority, to secure funding for the integrated rail plan replacement site for a station at Toton when the HS2 hub where the eastern arm fell through. That would significantly improve not just the policy recommendations under policy 21 transport recommendations, but would add fundamentally an overland mainland station, which not only gives access to the Toton economic strategic arm, but also would help the wider East Midlands, freeing up the Amber Valley, freeing up the Peak District for investment and tourism as well. And we should do everything we can to try and influence Claire Ward and the EMCA office to try and support that as a priority for her.
Thank you very much, Councillor Marshall. For your information, myself and Councillor Marshall have already met a representative from EMCA to put forward these proposals, and one of our key objectives in there, as spoken about, is the Toton area for growth. Now, the issue about access and transportation is the extension of the Toton tram from the park and ride through to a new station as part of the integrated rail plan, which seems to be kicked into the long grass. And I've also raised extensively now with EMCA the electrification of the Midlands Main Line, which should never ever be forgotten. These are key to ensuring significant growth that takes place in Broxtowe. But not only is the station at Toton important with the tram extension from Toton Park, it's also part of the strategy to link Long Eaton through to Derby as well to access employment. So there is a key factor contained within all our infrastructure projects about this link. And we are, at the moment, two of our officers are assembling a pack together for all the major developments that are proposed within the core strategy to present to EMCA in detail. I think you've been asked for some already, Ryan. Yeah. And as soon as that document's ready, I'll make that available to all cabinet members and anybody else who's interested. But it sets out our vision for not only growth in housing and in business, but also our objectives about protecting the environment and ensuring all connectivity extends not just in Broxtowe but to the wider area. You rightly pointed out the East Midlands Tourist Strategy is essential that Towton Station is able to link particularly to the Peak District. Cars in the area just really making it unworkable. And so what we want to see therefore is an extension of the Maid Marian line. I strongly support that as well. And the development of Towton Station and the integrated railway plan linking and never ever let this subject of electrification of the Midlands Main Line fall from political favour, because that's something that's essential for our growth. Anything you want to add to that, Mark? Sorry about that, Elizabeth.
No, Chair.
Sounded like an officer now.
No, just like we're
If
well
only
aware.
I got the pay as well.
And we're well aware in terms of the infrastructure priorities at Towton, and MCA were at Joint Planning Advisory Board last week, and those views were obviously expressed as part of that discussion at Joint Planning Advisory Board.
Councillor Ryan?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I shall have more to say on this, no doubt, tomorrow night. But as a former chairman of JPAB, I know exactly what goes into this sort of production to get the an awful lot does go into it. And just as an aside, it's interesting how Broxtowe, Rushcliffe, and the city have been able to work together, and we're not a super council. You know, isn't it amazing how we've been able to work together and come up with a document that, by and large, we can all endorse? So I think there's a message from the side there to go to government. I'm going to be discussing this with my group in a few minutes' time, so I can't unilaterally endorse it, but I recognise only too well how important it is that we have a plan submitted. We cannot afford to not submit a plan. Yeah. You only have to look down the road to Ashfield to see what happens when you don't submit a local plan. And I think the only area that I think some of my group may find a little contentious is the Harworth development and the fact that it is on Green Belt. I understand it wasn't originally Green Belt, but that was then put into the Green Belt, and it has been a former industrial area. So I think and you've tried to give some reassurances tonight, but I think there needs to be an awful lot of reassurance going out as to how the green infrastructure and the Green Belt that's left there is all going to meld together, and we're not going to have an environmental disaster. But I think, having said that, the rest is something that we will, I'm sure, be able to support. But all I'm saying is that one or two of my members may want to comment on that tomorrow. I think what's particularly encouraging is the fact that significant areas of Green Belt will be protected. And I would hope that a message will go out when from tomorrow night that Green Belt is sacrosanct, because we've got speculative developers trying to get planning permission on existing Green Belt. We've got one, I don't know whether it's been submitted yet, for sheds. No, Mr. Thompson's shaking his head, for sheds on a very important Green Belt at Nuttall. And it's totally unacceptable. And there have been certainly speculative inquiries about land in the vicinity of Strelly Village, Catstone Park, I think something like Catstone Hill, which is completely in Green Belt, and to allow it would completely destroy the setting and the conservation area of Strelly Village. So those important assets should be protected and will need to be protected. And perhaps the concept of a country park is something that could be looked at for certain areas of Green Belt around Nuttall, because they are crisscrossed in some cases by footpaths, and that would be a huge asset. I remember many, many years ago, I tried to persuade my group to buy up the old Nuttall Temple site and turn it into a country park. They weren't prepared to spend all the money to buy it in at that time. We've suffered the consequences ever since. So I think we need to have a positive view on this, and I'm hoping that we can get behind this 100%, apart from the issues that might arise over the Benelli area.
So, just if I answer that on a political level rather than an officer level, I think I've made it abundantly clear to all developers, whether it's industrial, whether it's residential, that unless they come up with a compensatory package for management and maintenance and enhancement of the local environment, then it's not likely to be looked on favourably. It's not predetermination. So what we've insisted therefore, that if a development is going to go forward at Benley, it has to have the restoration and management of the environment of the whole of the Erewash Valley, which I think would be a massive gain for the area, a massive gain. Accepted that the park takes over something around 20 odd acres and it's about 1.5 million square foot of development, which is substantial, and it will hopefully produce thousands of jobs much needed in the area. Ilkeston, Cockmanay, Eastwood, right away through to Orsworth, absolutely essential for future growth and for future wealth and prosperity. However, every single one that we're putting forward has got a major environmental gain, and I've said tonight from the outset, and in particular the recommendation to designate that land for the DH Launch Country Park will give us, I think, more compensation in terms of the environment that will go a long way towards making us carbon neutral and our contribution towards climate change. Martin, if you want to add at this stage as an officer, and I can do that more freely as a politician.
Just in terms of, I suppose the focus is sometimes on housing, but in terms of logistics, if we didn't allocate any site, I think again would be at significant risk of speculative development. And we did do a comprehensive call for sites in terms of logistics, and there was significant interest for a number of sites across the Broxtowe Greenbelt, pretty much all sort of large areas of open countryside, which is close to the M1. Site promoters were putting forward for logistics, and we considered all of those options, and by far sort of the preferred option was the one which we're putting forward due to a number of reasons, but in terms of that compensation and which we can provide in terms of with the country park, in terms of the environmental enhancements along the Erewash Valley, and just protecting long-term sort of defensible boundaries of the Greenbelt in that area too, that was seen as favourable. So there's been quite a lot of work in terms of looking at all the options, but this was seen as certainly the most preferable and the best way of making sure that we try and have the best case of being able to resist other speculative logistics developments in Broxtowe should they come forward.
Okay, any further questions or comments? No? Okay, if there are no further questions or comments, the recommendations are moved and seconded. All those in favour? Tonight we are recommending to Council, which will hear the debate tomorrow night, and we hope that people will give this plan their support. Next item is item 6.2, which is the houses in multiple occupancy in Article 4, which is pages 361 to 364. Just let me settle down. This is a noted report. I'm sure you're all aware of houses in multiple occupation, which has become very much high on the political agenda now for across areas. So I'll go straight across to our officer who's been working on this, and we've commissioned a report through the Joint Planning Advisory Board through JPAB to try and get some continuity and working arrangements together for all those authorities affected. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is a brief update in terms of the position we are in terms of this additional work. The report was drafted originally for the November committee, so Cabinet. So there's been a bit of progress since then. And primarily it's that we've now produced a report for Policy Overview Working Group in January with some options looking forward in terms of what we might do in terms of Article 4 areas in Broxtowe. So that will be for discussion at Policy Overview Working Group in January, and looking at some of the pros and risks in terms of those options. But just touching upon the work at Joint Planning Advisory Board, that did show that Area Wash are progressing with introducing 2 Article 4 areas in relation to houses in multiple occupation, covering a large part of Ilkeston urban area and also Long Eaton urban area. So that would potentially have implications in terms of Broxtowe because of the close boundary with that. But then Ashfield, Gedling and Rushcliffe are all at various stages at looking at data, collecting data and looking in terms of whether there's been any concentrations of HMOs arising and whether there's any planning implications if there are any concentrations. So I think everybody is in similar positions other than Nottingham City, who have a long-standing Article 4 covering the city area. We're not in particular, well, we've got to be aware of what we can do in terms of Article 4s. So it's quite prescriptive in terms of the MPPF, where it says it's got to apply to the smallest geographical area possible. And we do need the evidence to support whatever options we do take forward. So again, that will be covered in terms of policy overview working group, looking at what the data shows and what that might look at in terms of Article 4 has been introduced. So the other thing is, I mentioned it under the last item, is our policy position would be significantly strengthened with the new policy 8 in terms of the strategic plan, which gives us a firmer policy basis. We've had a mixed sort of results in terms of planning appeals, in terms of what the inspectors, how they apply the SPD, because the SPD is just supplementary planning guidance, so it doesn't have the full weight of a policy. That's where we're trying to fill this gap in terms of giving that policy much more sort of firmer basis through the strategic plan. So we'll see where we are in terms of policy overview working group, and then bring that recommendation to the next cabinet after that, with hopefully work proceeding quickly in terms of whatever was decided at that meeting.
Thank you very much, Mark. Is everybody clear on what we're doing? I want to say, draw your attention particularly to page 361, the paragraph that begins options, where it says options presented by the policy overview working group will come back to us in February. That work will be pretty essential to understand and draw particular attention to those members of policy overview working group that it is supposed to be about the smallest geographical area possible, and the Secretary of State reserves the right to cancel that at any moment's notice, before or after the decision. However, I think what it needs to look at is concentrations of HMOs within communities which affect the balance and nature of any community. There are a number of issues related to this, but I don't want to preempt the work, so we'll look forward to a fruitful discussion, and I will be on that call just in case you need any help, support or guidance. Are there any questions or comments, Councillor Bourne?
I was just saying I'm really pleased to see us coming forward and to have a timeline for it coming through to policy working group and hopefully getting into to cabinet very soon, not least because it means officers won't have to listen to me keep asking them about when this report is going to come. Obviously it's something, as councillor for Beeston Central, Article 4 has been a big topic of interest for us, seeing how it worked and sort of learning from the process. One of the things that I want to just make sure that discussion at Policy Working Group covers is the aspect that relates to HMOs, which is about purpose-built accommodation and how that works alongside HMOs, and making sure that the policy considers the relationship between the two, because that has been a point where we've had some criticism from developers and similar that the policy isn't clear enough, so we want to make sure that that's addressed. And also the issue that is mentioned in here around those space standards, to make sure that it's not being used as a way to provide people that actually live in that accommodation all year round, in the case of a lot of students and non-students in HMOs, to be putting them into smaller space standards than we'd expect from other sorts of accommodation. So, like I say, I know you know this because I keep banging on about it, but just to reiterate in a public forum, those sorts of the things that I'm looking forward to addressing through this. And thank you very much to officers for working on it. I know it's been a lot of considerations gone into it already. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments? No? So, do you wish to come back on?
Oh no, just in terms of Councillor Brunn's comments, we'll make sure they are included within the policy overview working group, which I keep not being able to say, so I'll try and put my teeth in before the next meeting.
If there are no further questions or comments, then I'll see that the report is duly noted, and we'll look forward to the policy overview working group meeting and then Cabinet resolving this in February. Noted. The next item is the recruitment of a quantity surveyor, which is set out on pages 365 368. We've got Darren Ibell here tonight, Assistant Director of Asset Management. Darren, if you'd like to take us through the report before I go to the recommendation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm just moving the. There we go. Yes, obviously you'll see the report in the pack. We've often had issues with recruitment of technical staff, and we've seemed to have, over a period of time, as a sector, not just as a council, in Broxtowe, sort of migrated towards expensive agency temporary staff, or used expensive consultants to support some of the projects that we deliver. And one of the aspects of trying to get us on a more sustainable recruitment footing and look as a council how we recruit, not only for today but for the future. This is another step along that line, really. So the proposal is to start internalising some of these activities and these roles, rather than continually going out to consultants all of the time. I accept that there will be a need to still do that, but we need to bring some internal skill within the council to be able to run some of those ourselves. So this role is one of a few that will be coming to Cabinet across the next months into 2026, which will be looking to achieve that. So yes, that's kind of like a summary, really, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. The recommendation on page 365 I move from the Chair.
Second that.
Any questions or comments? No? No questions or comments? If not, then well, I'll move straight to the vote. We ask to resolve tonight the quantity surveyor post be added to the permanent establishment of asset management. Moved and seconded. All those in favour? That is unanimously agreed. Oh, easy. Excellent. Item 7 is a Cabinet Work Programme on pages 369 370. That will be amended accordingly, but the recommendation tonight resolve the work programme, including key decisions, be approved, and move that from the Chair.
Second.
Questions or comments? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Chair. It was slightly remiss of me earlier when I was talking about the cemetery report, Chair, that you know, this has taken a significant amount of time to get to this position, and you know, it's been very frustrating that we've not been able to discuss it tonight. So obviously you were at the room, but what we said was I'd be included in that EQIA scoping, so that we can bring that at the very earliest time. I think, Chair, it would be good to have that on the February, to aim for that for the February work programme.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we should just you know, apologise on behalf of the council to you know, those who've been involved in that cemetery report to date, that it hasn't been able to be discussed tonight, and as such, through this item, commit that it will come back at that very earliest opportunity. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for that. Any further questions or comments? That is now an amended recommendation that on the 3rd of February a cemetery report will go back to Cabinet with that amendment, recommendation moved and seconded. All those in favour? Agreed. That's when it will be. That's when it will be due. There will be no further delays. Right. Exclusion of public and press. Just before we go to exclusion of public and press, can I just ask? Is it on item 9? There are a lot of people from members of the public here tonight. I think it would be very beneficial to hear this report. Is there anything contained within that that makes it so that they have to leave the room?
Commercial detail.
They haven't got the papers, have they? Okay. I'm sorry about this. I would like you to have heard this report, but I'm quite happy to talk to you about it afterwards, public, if anybody wants to look. So the recommendation before us tonight is that exclusion of public and press under resolve under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, public and press be excluded.
I'll second that.
All those in favour? Thank you very much.